We're live.
Welcome back to the House Environment Committee. We are going to be hearing an update from the Vermont Housing Conservation Board on progress on Act 59. There's a lot of folks in the room. Do you want to introduce them? Are you all planning to speak?
I'm going to introduce our team, and then there's members of the TAC who will speak when we're done. And our plan is to try to be done 11:15, 11:20, because I think you wanted to hear from the TAC.
Yes, that would be great.
That may depend on the number of questions you ask us. So for the record, Gus Seelig, Executive Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And
I'm Annie Decker. I'm the Associate Director of Resource Development and Resiliency at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
I'm Isaac Passell, the Conservation Stewardship Director at the Board.
And I'm Trey Martin, the Director of Conservation and Rural Community Development.
Okay, so very briefly, I'm going to give the briefest of overviews and just say that, start by saying thank you to this committee, which helped get the board going many years ago, and you'll get our annual report, I think, tomorrow on all the activities that we've been up to. We are, for those of you who don't know very much about us or are confused by the alphabet soup of organizations and entities that you deal with, a multi-purpose organization that really stands at the crossroads of land use. We are organized as a.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, Gus. Sorry, excuse me. We don't let folks sit behind us over there. Thanks. If you can find another spot, that'd be great.
We are organized as a quasi-public entity with responsibilities both to build housing, rehabilitate housing, and to conserve all types of land. And what you're looking at, we do that by making grants and loans either to municipalities or nonprofits or specific state agencies. And we have been charged with developing the Act 59 conservation plan in consultation with the Agency of National Resources. And of course, we're doing that also in consultation with you and tons of members of the public. We delivered an inventory report. We wrote to you last year about the delay in receipt of federal funds that held up our ability to get the planning process underway by a year. But our plan is to deliver that report at the end of this fiscal year, right around June 30, July 1. And that's still our plan. You're looking at a photograph that I think typifies our work of Willie Woods. In West Burke, it's the first publicly owned land there and has great environmental value, great resilience value for that community. Here's the goals that you gave us in statute, which speak to economic vitality and quality of life for Vermonters. And you're looking again at Putney, Vermont, where we're building housing, providing permanent space for community garden and farmers market adjacent to or right across from the food co-op in Putney and just down the street from key historic buildings. Putney is an interesting community because we've worked with them, Putney Mountain Association and the Windmill Hill Pinnacle Association, on conservation of ridgeline that has now, their original goal was 1,000 acres and a 10-mile hiking trail reached 25 miles and 2,500 acres. And I think our goal, again, as we lay out the plan and develop it, is going to be more and more community-led conservation along with the work we do with public entities and private landowners. This is a recent project that we love, Willie Woods, that speaks to our, this is Muddy Moose. It is in Morristown, and it speaks to our dual goals. In this case, a 150-acre parcel contains 8 vacation homes that are going to move from being vacation homes to year-round permanent affordable housing for 6 of the 8 homes. The other 2 will just be market rate homes. The 150 acres is really critical to the Lamoille Valley ecosystem, includes 12 acres of floodplain forest, includes 7,700 feet of surface water protections along streams, and really speaks to how our land in Vermont really speaks to multiple uses. So we're getting a lot out of the investment, which was a partnership between Down Street Housing and the Stowe Land Trust. This, we hope we come back on a different day to talk about rural communities and economic vitality, but On the right is Lisa McDougall, who's a farmer who farmed on leased land in Pownell for a decade and used the Farmland Access Program to get a permanent home. In Shaftesbury, in Whetstone, you're seeing a 12-acre floodplain restoration, which will, along the Whetstone Brook, which will make the whole community safer. Big berm was removed. In East Calais, this is one of 80 historic preservation projects we've done around the state, and our statute defines conservation to include historic preservation. The store was reopened. It's a great success. There are 3 affordable apartments. And you may have heard recently about Vermont, our work with the Vermont Land Trust and Vermont Adaptive, who just got a permanent home in Rochester that will conserve land. And among the things they do is provide support for people with disabilities, and the support for veterans is always at no charge. So I think a great win for conservation, a great win for outdoor recreation. I'm going to turn this over to Annie in 1 minute. But Act 59, the Community Resilience and Biodiversity Act, is what brings us to this. And I want to say a few things about things that have changed since Act 59 was adopted, because we're living in a different world. And my recollection, Madam Chair, is that there was a predecessor act to Act 59 that did not succeed. And VHCB came forward when Act 59 was proposed to take the lead in doing the plan. And I think that's because of our track record of having conserved over 450,000 acres of farm and forest land across the state and working with a wide variety of stakeholders. What's changed the most are the assumptions that we had with the federal government and the Inflation Reduction Act, which would have given Vermont a lot of federal funding to implement and increase the rate of conservation. And fundamentally, the new administration has put those resources on the shelf, canceled many of them. Doesn't mean there's no federal resources left. There are still forest legacy funds, there's still community forestry funds, there's still land and water conservation funds, but greatly diminished amount of federal resources. And as you all know from talking to your friends and neighbors, state resources are only getting tighter. Having said that, you did double our base budget by allocating the full transfer tax to fund us, and that's allowed us fundamentally to triple support for natural area projects, recreation projects, the sort of projects that really focus on biodiversity while holding steady our support for farmland conservation and increasing support for the Farm and Forest Viability Program. As you hear from my colleagues, aside from the changes in the atmosphere around increasing the pace of conservation, what we've heard from many people is we want not only to increase the rate of conservation, but to increase the quality of it, to increase restoration activities, and to increase support for landowners, to build more capacity to undertake the mission, and to enhance stewardship. So those will be all important elements that you'll hear about as we go forward, both today and as we work on the report and work with TAC members. And with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Annie.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Sheldon, can I bring this chair up so Isaac can join me up front? Thank you. Well, thank you all again. Excited to give an overview on kind of Act 59, where the work stands, and kind of what's to come over the next few months as we prepare to deliver a plan to this committee. I did want to just start quickly, and I know this committee knows Act 59 well. You heard testimony last week that also touched a bit on Act 59 from FBR. But I did want to highlight just the vision and goals in the act are really, we're using this as a guide for the scope of the plan as it's being drafted. The vision as it stands is pretty broad and comprehensive, but the goals are specific, and there's specific targets. So we're holding both of those pieces as we're working on drafting this plan. The Act 59 centers biodiversity protection and natural area conservation, but its overall vision does include more than that. It calls for conservation, but also supporting resilient communities and providing other public benefits. And this integrated approach that stacks conservation outcomes with other community outcomes closely aligns with the work that we do at VHCB. So this morning, as we talk about Act 59 and updates and what's coming, we're also excited to highlight some projects that do have strong biodiversity outcomes that we've supported, but also provide broader community benefits and climate resilience benefits. Just to provide some examples of what we think this conservation really can look like on the ground and for communities moving forward.
Yeah, and so what you can see here on the screen is the Shutesville Hill Wildlife Corridor, and we think it's a really great example of some of the actions that are likely to be rising to the top as we draft the plan. It's a place where coalition building and enhancing partner capacity can really result in outcomes that advance the goals of Act 59. And so, this is a Vermont Conservation Design priority target area. There was a recent report that came out last March about implementing Vermont Conservation Design that talked about stepping stone blocks that help to facilitate wide wildlife movement between interior forest blocks. In this case, we're talking about a critical linkage between the Northern Green Mountains and the Worcester Range. And so we have had some projects that have closed recently and some projects that are recently funded in this area where that coalition coming together has really helped to advance the goals of Vermont Conservation Design. And where we're wondering, how can we help those types of efforts expand across the state to talk about all the 10 linkages that have been lifted up in implementing Vermont Conservation Design. And that implementing Vermont Conservation Design report is sort of part of the core of how we're structuring the Vermont Conservation Design portion of the conservation plan. So we feel like it's a real opportunity to try to spread the success that's happened here to other areas across the state.
I will touch on the Act 59 timeline very briefly. Again, I think this committee knows this well. But for phase one, that was the inventory report. That was the first kind of task at hand as per the act that was completed in July of 2024. I think an important piece that we want to touch on about the inventory report process, as we are now working on drafting the conservation plan, we received a lot of input during the phase one inventory report phase. There was a lot of stakeholder engagement that was included in the report itself, but we are using that outreach and engagement we received during that phase of the project to now help inform the draft plan that we've been working on. And there's slides later in this deck that speak to the public process we're going through to now kind of unveil that draft and receive additional comment and input, but wanted to just elevate that piece of this work. But we are now in phase two, the drafting of the conservation plan itself. We'll talk more about what that looks like in later slides, but that will be due June 30th. And we have been engaging in a comprehensive round of stakeholder engagement that we're excited to talk about in more detail. Very, very quickly, we did just want to highlight again, these are the results of the phase one inventory phase. We received, again, a lot of stakeholder engagement and input as part of this phase. And I think what we just want to highlight again is identifying that the acreage needed to meet those 2030 goals is that 189,953 acres number, and kind of holding that and elevating that as we draft this plan. And how do we get there?
Yeah, and so you can see here a shot that looks westward over the Shutesville Hill Wildlife Corridor towards the Mount Mansfield block. And it just sort of illustrates one way that VHCB is already leaning into the types of projects that are priorities for Vermont Conservation Design. One way is that we've retooled our private working forest policy to help expand the types of projects that are eligible. And so we're already seeing projects that we're funding. We recently funded one that's in this shot, but we haven't yet closed. And so that's sort of one way that we're leaning in. Another way that we're leaning into trying to advance private lands conservation efforts is that we've heard from partners that they have donation easement pipelines that they don't have the capacity to implement because there's cost associated with doing a donation easement project. We've recently approved a policy where we can fund half of those costs without bringing the project to the full board, a streamlined process, trying to find efficiencies in this time to advance the conservation goals of Act 59. So we're definitely leaning fully into trying to advance this work in the most efficient way possible.
So we are now in phase two, again, which is the drafting of the conservation plan itself. We wanted to talk about, as we are drafting the plan, we're using the vision and the goals as kind of a framework for the scope of the plan. We're also looking at the act and the 4 key criteria that are kind of identified as the components of the plan. And these would be conserving Vermont's agricultural land, working forests, historic properties, and surface waters, developing an implementation methods for achieving the vision and goals of the act using Vermont Conservation Design as a guide, providing and increasing equitable access to protected and conserved lands and land-based enterprises, and implementing the vision of the goals of the act while also enhancing the state's current investments in working lands enterprises. So just using this as another demonstration of this is like the scope and the framework with which we are approaching putting together a draft plan and kind of iterative drafts that we will continue to receive public input on over the coming months.
Yeah, and the photo you see here is just another way that we've been leaning in to try to find efficiencies in these efforts. I know Danny came and spoke to you this past week and talked about trying to accelerate state land acquisitions. These are two projects that we've recently funded and another connectivity block that's a priority where we are not going to have a co-holding easement partner. Our partners have come to us and said, we feel like we can better use our capacity to advance the goals, focusing on other places to protect, and that this is a place where VHCB can step up and really help to accelerate state lands by being the sole easement holder. And so these are good examples of that, again, in locations that have been identified in implementing Vermont conservation design as priority areas, and then also a coalition effort to focus our conservation efforts on these really lands that are incredibly important for connectivity. And so the coalition, the enhancing partner capacity, and the finding efficiencies are all part of the story here in ways that we're trying to advance the goals.
Can we just
Mhm.
visit this map a little bit?
Mhm.
And just walk us through the colors. I get green is already state land.
Yeah, so green is state land, and I'm seeing that there's private land conservation in yellow, and then the two orange are the projects that we've recently funded that are new state land acquisitions. And then there's gray, which is important connectivity block, but that our partners are coming together similar to a Shutesville Hill type scenario to try to figure out how to expand conservation efforts in these areas that the Vermont Conservation Design drafting crew have lifted up as places where permanent conservation is critical. And so I think everyone is really aligned here, and it's just the coalition effort and bringing these conservation partners and state lands and funders together to focus on the areas that are most critical right now.
So the gray, or I'm seeing slightly pink, is kind of landowners you might be working with.
I don't think we're identifying like specific parcels of landowners that we're working with. I think there's some pink municipal lands in there as well. And then the two orange blocks, which are surrounded by gray lands, are part of the priority area, but we haven't identified specific parcels on this map that are a target for our conservation partners. It's just sort of the whole connectivity corridor between the Camel's Hump State Park and Mount Mansfield that we're feeling like we want to find permanent conservation and connectivity there. And our partners are working on that, but we don't show any specific parcels there that are targeted, although there's a lot of effort to work with landowners.
Yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
trying to find specific parcel.
Yeah.
Just trying to understand the pink is not yet conserved and it's.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
the pink looks a little gray. It's the majority of the map is that grayish pinkish color.
Okay,
I think we're
yeah,
looking
yeah.
at that same.
Okay.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, can you just expand a bit on how you provide an increased equitable access
Sure. Well, I mean,
and what that means? I mean, and what that looks
it
like.
depends on which parcels you're talking about. For state lands acquisition, one thing that's always critical for us is making sure that there's permanent access, public access to parcels. So all of our state land acquisitions and all of our natural area projects require public access. And that's pretty foundational to the work. It's just first public access. So people have a right to go and walk on the land and hunt and to do all the ways that people engage. That's really important when we make those investments. It can look, it's a different type of way that we approach it in farmland. Our farmland, we've put something in place called the option to purchase at agricultural value that tries to hold farmland at a more affordable price so that farmers in the future can actually afford to acquire those lands and aren't competing with larger market forces that don't relate to agriculture. And we understand that even that can be difficult for new and beginning farmers to land onto land. And so you'll see actions in the draft plan that's coming out where we're thinking about how can we do more? How can the state do more? How can all of our partners come together to do more to help those new and beginning farmers where they're having to compete with farmers with a lot of capital? And so how can we advance the new and beginning farmers too? There's more work to do there But the OPAV that I think the state is, as a state, really leading on is an incredible foundation to build upon. And so there's also community-related projects that we focus on, and that might be a higher price to invest in, but that are going to result in public access, in places that are closer to it.
I think you'll see another slide or two that'll speak to equitable access. And I would just say the Rochester example with Vermont Adaptive is another attempt at enhancing equitable access.
That and, our demographic is, we're definitely growing to an older, we have the highest demographic, I think, in the country for elderly, and just, making sure there are thoughts on how, Vermonters will be able to access the wilderness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so go ahead with
Oh,
your.
appreciate that feedback, and that providing and increasing equitable access is kind of one of the 4 key components of, as we're drafting the plan, and holding that piece is something we're thinking about a lot across all of these different types of conservation. So thank you for asking that and elevating that. I'll continue. Great. So wanted to touch a bit about the ways that we are engaging all of the different stakeholders who are involved in this project. The act itself identifies a number of stakeholder groups that VHCB, in consultation with ANR, should engage with as we draft this plan. So we have formed a technical advisory committee that has a member representing each of those stakeholder groups. That technical advisory committee, or the TAC, convened starting in May of 2025 and will continue meeting through the duration of this project. They meet about monthly. You can find information about what the TAC is up to on our project website, but essentially the TAC is serving in an advisory capacity, working with VHCB and ANR staff as we are developing draft content, bringing that to the TAC, synthesizing the comments and input that we're receiving, and developing materials that we then are sharing more broadly with the public. And that's kind of the iterative process that we're going through as we're developing this draft plan. So TAC is kind of serving as a sounding board in that way, and a liaison to the stakeholder groups that they help represent, so that we can ensure we're getting as much input and engagement around this draft plan as we can. Wanted to also touch briefly, I think this slide is probably one that this committee has seen before, but sharing the framework of how we're constructing this draft plan. So we have the vision and goals, those 4 planning components, and we are kind of approaching that work by organizing the plan around 3 key objectives. Objective 1 and 2 in the most recent draft that will come out next week are actually switched. So objective 1 will actually be the objective that focuses on centering Vermont conservation design. So this is kind of the ecological backbone of the plan, talking about how we restore and maintain an ecologically functioning and connected natural and working landscape. And then objective 2 will be that supporting conservation and communities objective. So this is kind of people on the land. We'll talk about working lands, equitable access in more detail, enhancing recreation opportunities. And then objective 3 kind of brings it all together and talks about what do we need to actually kind of implement these actions identified under objective 1 and 2. It's about the capacity, the people, the funding, the collaborative opportunities. How do we work together to do this work and then steward the land that we're conserving? So kind of what's going on right now and what's coming in the next few months, and how to stay involved in all the work that we're doing. So last night I shared with the committee the framework report. I think that's what you've seen ahead of our testimony today. That report was kind of an early draft plan that came out this fall that was shared broadly with stakeholders. We received a lot of public input, and we have turned that, plus a lot of other feedback we've heard, into a draft expanded framework report that will be released on Monday. So apologies, we don't have that for you today, but we are excited to share that next week that will be available and live and on the website and ready for deep discussion and engagement and feedback. That expanded framework report will be on the project website. It will live there for 2 months. We're providing a lot of opportunity for input engagement directly through the project website on that draft, but we're also kind of taking it on the road. So we have our second round of regional listening sessions, which will take place across the state, also starting next Monday, and then 5 Mondays from there. going to different locations around the state and talking to folks in their communities and engaging with them on this draft material and hearing what's landing, what isn't, what are exciting opportunities that people are identifying in their communities. We'll also have a virtual session for those who can't meet in person. We also have a stakeholder-led listening session opportunity that was an application opportunity we put out to all stakeholder groups to host their own meetings related to this draft plan. And excited, there's been a lot of demand for that. We'll be reviewing those applications over the next few weeks, but we were really excited to see that stakeholder groups were very excited for this opportunity. And we're really looking forward to hearing what feedback comes out of those conversations. And then I just wanted to plug, we have this project website, vermontconservationplan.com, where you can follow along, see kind of those most recent drafts, what's coming up, where are these listening sessions being held, what's the TAC up to. It's a great landing page to stay involved and informed. And of course, we're always happy to answer questions and help navigate what's going on with Act 59. And at that, I'm going to hand it over to Trey.
I wanted you to get to meet all of us today. And from us, and also to kind of break it up so that you're going to hear some repetition now of things that you've already heard, but kind of going back into what are the key themes. The chair and I spoke last week, and she asked that, we talk about what are we excited about? What are we doing? What is this? What are we manifesting in this plan? And so we thought we wanted to talk about some of the urgencies that we've heard and then some of the ways that we're addressing this. And, you don't have to look up and look around too much these days to know that, there's an urgency out there that has nothing to do with Vermont and nothing to do with biodiversity, but just an urgency of democracy. And it makes me recall last spring, Gus and I got to go to the Wolcott Community Forest closing with the Trust for Public Land and the Northern Rivers Land Trust and the school and the community. This is hundreds of acres protected adjacent to a school with affordable housing, interior forest. It's a connectivity zone. There's miles of stream frontage, and it's a living laboratory for the Wolcott Elementary School that's located there. There's trails across all that property. And when Gus spoke to the community, he talked about this. This is how we come together in a nonpartisan way to take care of our places, our communities, our families, and our lives. That's what conservation can do, and that's why we all love our work. And that's sort of the first theme, is that we want to bring this act, we want to bring these recommendations to the body, because this gives a chance for people to work together and set aside some of the things that divide us. There are a lot of needs and there are a lot of barriers right now. You could see the photo that Andrew Brewer took of the flood a couple of summers ago in downtown Montpelier. My recollection of that summer is just the way that all of our children ran towards danger to take care of our downtown, to empty out the basements of the stores, wading through stuff that was like, we used to tell our daughter Finley that her boots, we call them the cess boots, because they were covered in something gross, but cess was the least gross thing in the floodwaters in Montpelier. And when you think about what it revealed to us, it's that there's not only a critical shortfall of capacity and funding to think about what permanent conservation can do to increase resilience, but we weren't collaborative enough. We didn't have enough TA, we didn't have enough stewardship, we don't have enough coordination to think about how do we use this tool that is driven by applicants and partners. They come forward when a landowner says, I want to conserve. How do we begin to think about doing this in a strategic way? What's the model that shows where conserved wetlands or restored wetlands and floodplains would actually decrease the danger for our downtowns while also opening up habitat and access to those places? How can we be really intentional about what we do? Which means we need to have more of that. We need capacity across the spectrum of organizations who do this. And we need to be really intentional about having shared priorities and so that we know that when we say we're bringing state investments, that they're contributing to this pattern of connection and function. In terms of what we've been doing, Gus and the team have touched on a bunch of different innovations that we've brought forward at VHCB. I think the most important thing to recognize, though, is that, as Gus said, your support has allowed us to triple the amount of work, the amount of funding and capacity that goes out into natural area protection over the last 5 years. And the trend, if it continues, looks really strong, where the program is building, the pipeline of projects is increasing with partners. The interest in collaboration around things like reconnecting the greens or the Shutesville corridor or other connective blocks that's as we gain a common language and a set of common goals, we're already seeing that that's paying off. We're, as Gus and folks said, we're also doing this through that sole held easement program where we can, instead of having a complicated deal with multiple partners, we can hold for public lands. We can provide funding for donated easements. We've been increasing not just the amount of money that we give to partners, nonprofits to do the work, but we're finding new partners out there who want to be part of that system. So, from the traditional partners that you think of all the way out now to Cold Hollow to Canada, and Trust for Public Land has increased its work. Northern Rivers Land Trust that I mentioned, Stowe Land Trust has really stepped up in their region. Down in Southern Vermont, there's a group of small trusts that have really come together called the Southern Vermont Conservation Coalition. They're working to also be really, really intentional. So lastly, we've recognized in terms of needs and investments and innovations that we really need to also think about those really large partners, the Nature Conservancy, Vermont Land Trust, ANR, the ones who hold a lot of the conserved land and whose job it is to take care of that in perpetuity, which means forever, which is expensive and hard to even imagine. But we gave investments to both VLT and ANR recently to increase their stewardship, and we've been working closely with TNC to help them think more broadly about partner capacity. Another theme that we're really, want to make sure that we're talking about is collaboration. I think you've heard a lot about that today already, about the way that we bring people together, but it is about that, like I said, that shared language or shared priorities that we have. This is one of our favorite partnerships is the work we've done with Fish and Wildlife. You can see the Lemon Fair Wildlife Management Area there, which is over 1,500 acres of land that's accessible for regulated hunting, fishing, and trapping, wildlife watching. It's a migratory bird refugia. It's a wonderful wetland bottomland community. And it's come together because so many local partners have worked with Fish and Wildlife to bring lots and lots of parcels into that 1,500 acres. Our most recent project there was 176 acres, and that's how we've been doing it, is building these really large protected areas, one deal at a time. Again, you heard from Commissioner Fitzko last week about their work to imagine how VCD, the Vermont Conservation Design, would be implemented. So don't want to spend too much time on that today, except to add one thing, which is that you heard Isaac and Annie were talking about reconnecting the greens and the Shutesville corridor.
You just hold for a second. I hear you. Thanks.
Sorry about that. The button gets pushed and I just keep going. But yeah, no, I wanted to highlight one other thing about the recommendations that ANR has brought forward around Vermont Conservation Design, which is, yes, it's about connectivity, it's about resilience, it's about protecting waterways and interior forests. But one of the key recommendations is that we also try to find ways to invest in the parts of Vermont that aren't as heavily conserved. And so that area that Isaac and Annie described in central Vermont, connecting the Greens and the Worcester and Camel Sump, this is a part of the state where we've really focused. The northern and southern Greens, the Worcester Range, the Northeast Kingdom. There are other places around Vermont that are much less subscribed, and where we're asking what do communities need in these other parts of Vermont to step into this, and so that's another big focus of that. Here's the Goulet WMA edition in Addison County, which is a fantastic project near where the chair lives, and it's over 3,000 acres. It's Ducks Unlimited plus EPA plus the HCB coming together to protect this. But how do we do this in the places, in southeastern Vermont and southwestern Vermont, places where communities haven't had this benefit yet? This is the fruit of collaboration is projects that have multiple benefits. So when you bring multiple partners together, you think about multiple outcomes, and that helps us to get more funding and more leverage and more work. So one of the things that this plan emphasizes is the stackability of benefits, or the co-benefits. And so, Darling Hill and you're going to hear from Nick in a little bit, one of our TAC members from the Trails and Greenways Council and VIMBA. But this isn't just about mountain biking. It's also a place that protected for mountain biking allows a lot of other goods for the community. It's not just the money that comes in, but it's protecting those forests, those meadows, those places that also produce boards and cords and agricultural commodities and other uses. So stackable benefits. Valley Brook in Morgan was a Act 76 funded project. So your clean water service providers, this is work we did up in the Northeast Kingdom where we restored, about a mile of this pristine brook. We rebuilt several culverts so that they are right sized for aquatic organism passage. We protected the road. The brook trout came back, rebuilt the whole alluvial fan and the wetland that leads into it, restored several and removed farm roads that were draining right into this. And the only problem with a project like this is that we can't do it everywhere. It's very expensive to do these restoration projects and how do you prioritize, which is, again, something we want to lean into. And then finally, Tangway up in Brunswick is on the Connecticut River. It's an example of multiple benefits where we not only are retiring and restoring some farmland that's in floodplain and isn't good for production of agricultural commodities, and there's a seed fall dispersal methodology that's going to let that grow back up into silver maple and other floodplain forest species. But we're slowly phasing out agriculture, and some of the parcel will continue to be productive in perpetuity. So there's not just conservation for the floodplain, but also for that ongoing production. And you asked about equity of access. So here's coming back to this last slide. These are 3 examples of what we mean by that. I think you heard already about farmland access on the far right there. This is another family that was able to access affordable farmland because of VLT's access program. They're also converting to organic, which is something that we often see. And we talk about the importance of farmland in conservation for biodiversity because it's such a high percentage of conserved farms is woodland, wetland, meadows, and fields. So it's only small parts of conserved farms are growing, agricultural crops. So most of the farms we produce are helping to increase that connectivity and the protection of natural areas. Camp Dream on the far left is an effort VHEB has been involved with for a couple of decades, bringing kids from affordable housing communities from across the region to a honest, true summer camp experience in Vermont, but also allowed us to conserve a big block of land in Fletcher. There's a lovely watershed there, a really, really pristine pond that's accessible there. And then Camp Sunrise in Benson is one of our recent favorite projects where we worked with Outright Vermont to buy the old Boy Scout camp there, to restore it, to help them with the conservation so that they could then go out and raise the money to rebuild the dam and to rebuild the infrastructure so that LGBTQ youth can come from all over New England to one of the few places where it's safe and protected for summer camp experiences. But also 2 beautiful and pristine ponds that their whole shorelines are protected as a result of this conservation. There's a wooded parcel, there's a wetland, and there's a springing trail right in there as well. So the community is going to continue to have access in addition to the camp. That takes us to the end of kind of what we wanted to say to y'all this morning. I know we want to make way for some of the folks who've been on the TAC, but probably want to answer some questions first as well.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation to all of you and your work implementing Act 59. I know it was a big ask and that you've done a lot of work and a lot of learning along the way, and we appreciate it. I have a couple of nuts and bolts questions. Just to start off, you talked about some changes that you've made kind of along the way as you're implementing Act 59 and applying it to your existing programs. I'm curious about, well, first of all, is there a cap on conservation projects what is the cap on dollars that you'll put into a conservation project?
It depends on what type of a project it is. We have different guidelines that apply to different types of projects and they have different caps associated with them. So some of the caps, like for a local area project that's recreational focused, I think is it 150,000 or 175,000, but they go up all the way to $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 for some of the caps. And often we ask our board to waive the caps because projects are so important. Either the acreage has become more expensive over time as well. So
Yeah, because
that's something we're revisiting.
Yeah, I'm hearing feedback that the caps are not appropriate or that they're really limiting. The amount of money available isn't worth the time for staff to apply for the project. So where can we find that the different types of projects and the caps? Where's that laid out for
It's
us?
all on the VHCB website under conservation programs. There's guidelines, but we can write up a spreadsheet that we can send something back that says, here's the different guidelines and what the associated caps are.
Yeah,
And it's something we've heard too, and it's one of the recommendations in the plan is to look at our guidelines and figure out how to align them with the goals of the plan. So
Yeah.
we are aware of this and working towards that.
We have a committee of our board that has asked us to review and change the guidelines, so we
okay,
will revisit that in relatively short order this spring. And in the meantime, the board has repeatedly waived gaps in order to make a project happen.
yes,
The real estate market, as you know, has just changed dramatically since the pandemic began. So we're waiving them on most projects.
and I'm happy to hear that you're putting objective one as front and center, Vermont conservation design. That was like really big impetus behind this bill, was to get this exactly what I'm getting from you all, which is the coordination and the attention to the priorities that reflect that great framework. I have just want to sort of state publicly that I noticed that. That's great. I'm glad that that's going to be a priority. And I just would hope that in the previous slide where there's 4 things, there's no mention of biodiversity, which I think is a really important piece of what we're doing here, which is never to take away from the other great priorities that we've invested in the past, but to elevate biodiversity as a really critical feature of our conservation programs. So I see that you've done that in the objectives. I appreciate it. And I hope we can continue to hold that awareness.
And those 4 criteria that Annie talked about are taken straight from the act. That's from the planning mandate. So we include those along with the vision, along with the goals as kind of the constellation of stars we're navigating to. So the VCD is sort of proxy for this is all about connection and interior forest block health and function. But yes, we are in agreement about that.
And maybe now is not the time, although if you can give me the high level, well, I am interested in the requirements of conservation projects. So with that, awareness that biodiversity is also an important part of our conservation landscape. Hearing a little feedback that not every natural area conservation project needs to be held to like the public access trails, parking areas kind of standard. And I'd love to hear a response from you all about that.
Well, I mean, from our perspective, we have always said with private landowners, that's not a requirement.
Sorry, but a private individual landowner or like a nature conservancy or a conservation group private landowner?
With private landowner, with the Nature Conservancy, we have always sought multiple benefits. And it is a balancing act that we take on a case by case basis. So if there's really some reason that public cannot access that land, that is among the considerations that the board would take up in considering a project. So there's not a ban on it. But certainly when trade speaks to stackable benefits, when we have limited resources, project that has many benefits for the public may be more of a priority than one that has few.
We also do, when we think about recreational access, there's like trailheads and trails and infrastructure and stormwater control that comes with doing something really fancy. That's a kind of recreational access. And then there's other kinds of recreational access. I'm pointing to 2 TAC members you'll hear from here that are just diffuse, that what we need is pull-offs along the road and open unposted lands that hunters and anglers and trappers and climbers and wildlife watchers can access. We do want at least the latter, but then we sometimes are working with partners where the former has to happen as well. VHCB generally doesn't fund the infrastructure or trail building or that part of a project. We would be doing sort of what can we do with conservation? And then how does that leverage another partner coming in to help do a restoration project on the brook or help build trail infrastructure or help build a pull off that's going to be a place where people can just access a really good hunting grounds. So it really depends project to project.
Other members have questions before we shift gears? Representative Austin?
I just noticed on maps about Chittenden County, it seems like the effort to conserve land around that area. I'm just wondering if you're looking at that. I mean, there's a lot of people there and I don't want them to have to drive hours or to go to access. Of course, I'm wondering, are you looking in Chittenden County in that area, the region?
We have worked with the Winooski Valley Park District. We've done a lot of work on Mount Mansfield. We've conserved Colchester Pond,
Yeah.
Eagle Mountain. So
Shelburne Farms.
Shelburne Farms, Shelburne Pond, which is distinct from Shelburne Farms.
I didn't know you did Shelburne Farms. That's.
We've worked with them on
Fabulous.
several occasions, including their acquisition of land from the Shelburne Museum when it was up for sale. So we've done an awful lot of farmland conservation in Charlotte. So there's no, obviously, we're always trying to balance projects from all over the state. It's why increasing our base funding is so important, because it's really, well, it held our farmland program steady. It's increased our focus on natural areas and recreation lands. We've worked with the town of Williston, as I'm thinking about it now, on several acquisitions. It clearly is more expensive in Chittenden County.
Mhm.
And so there's, one of the things in our statute is, can we leverage other monies? That's a consideration for the board. A different consideration that goes to, like, should we have no caps at all, is we have an obligation to every part of the state. So we have a very, very expensive project with no leverage. That means that maybe in another corner of the state where it's harder to fundraise, they're going to get shut out if we just have no capital. So those are all the kinds of things that our board has to balance and consider when an application comes in front of us. But I think that there is a fair amount of conservation that's been done in Chittenden County. It's not a like, forget it kind of zone. One of the projects I've spoken to you about that I think speaks best to our dual mission is one where, if you're familiar with Cambrian Rise in Burlington, there's 1,000 units that'll be developed on 27 acres. That was made possible because Vermont Land Trust went to the developer and to the city and raised a huge amount of money so that 12 acres would become a public park. That reduced the opposition to the development to just about nothing. And it means we're not going to have 1,000 units sprawled out over the countryside, because we're concentrating development, which I think supports our conservation mission as Vermonters.
Great, thank you. Very helpful.
Just to add one thing on, our partner Trust for Public Land has done work across the country to analyze how to make sure that all kids are walkable to a park or trailhead or green space. And so that's one of the things we've been hearing about in the plan, is how do we, there's another equitability of access thing. It's like, where are the recreational resources, or to use environmental justice terminology, the environmental benefits?
Mhm.
And how do we make sure conservation supports benefits in all the places?
Great, thank you.
Representative North?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation this morning. I noticed in the charts that FY 26 budget is about 6.5 million so far.
Well, that's about what we've spent so far. I think our total target was 2/3 higher than that, maybe
Oh,
around
okay.
10.
Okay, around 10. Or how much of that comes from the state of Vermont?
All of it.
All of it. I thought there were partners that you worked with to raise money to.
All that money is money we've spent, and all of that leverages other money. So every farmland project leverages an equal amount of NRCS funding through the ACFAL program. So that's funds farmland acquisition and protection. And then, so that's sort of a one-to-one match of
That's
public
one-to-one.
dollars. And then,
So 6.5 million, or shooting toward 10 million is half the story. There's-
Yeah, 6.5 was just natural area. wasn't
that's just
it?
natural
Yeah.
areas. And then we have about 5 million of state money going into farms, and then 5 million of NRCS going into farms. And then that 6 million is leveraging sometimes even higher than
Exactly.
one-to-ones.
Yeah.
When we did it in the inventory, we looked at the last, previous 6 years, and the natural area projects were leveraging at 1-8. Whereas farm was leveraging at 1-1. So an even
That's
better
just a matter
story.
of finding partners to work with you and donating. It's not like that's a statutorily identified ratio.
We're supposed to look for leverage, as Gus said, but then what we end up doing is is encouraging partners to do, is there a local contribution from the Conservation Commission, if there is one, and if they have a fund, have local folks donated to a campaign.
So in total, what's the state funding provided?
So about $10 million in fiscal year 26.
But that's, would be natural areas is what I'm hearing.
6.5 of that was in natural areas and then 5 or 6 into farms. And then another more public money coming in that we draw down from NRCS.
11, 12 from.
Yeah.
And is that remaining essentially constant into the, if we look ahead, I'm asking because I'm gonna be involved in putting it. What are we looking for? About saying we're keeping things level or?
We'd love to see that over time. We would love to build that, both in terms of that base support as well as one-time funding that can go out either for more projects or to more partners for their capacity. I think that in the inventory, we said that we needed to double to triple the pace of production. If you were gonna meet the 2030 goal, that's 187,000 acres in 5 years. That's way faster than we produce good conservation outcomes right now. So to think about doing that means that, one, can we innovate? Are there ways that we can do more with less? But also, we just know that partners have a hard time sometimes keeping the lights on, keeping their fundraising and communications going, much less having the funding to go out and develop
11 or
projects.
12 million from the state, how much of that was one time?
I think we're only using about $1 million of one-time funding this year. That was part of a appropriation 5 years ago. Yeah. So that was mostly base this year.
Okay.
Which is mostly property transfer tax.
Yeah,
It's entirely that. So what happens is that statutory requirements are there and we met them last year, which is
last 2 years, I think.
just something to celebrate, not something we always do. So it's great to see that you're able to scale up when you get your full allocation.
I was nervous when I started at VHCB because we had a lot of one-time funding as well as this, and how were we going to show you that we can use this? And it had been a little slower in the pandemic. And for that one slide, I mean, there are issues with the caps. There's issues with stewardship. There's issues with bringing projects forward. We feel like we've heard those things, we're addressing them, and we're starting to see it unlock. And Act 59 has been a really good galvanizer for that. It's created the running room for us to say, these are the things that we need to do. And so for that reason, I think we wouldn't be where we are if we hadn't also been doing this work. It's been a great so to stand on.
Great.
So thank you very much.
I'm sure we'll hear more from you when you report out and then also your regular annual report, but then also we'll keep following what you're doing here.
Yeah, we'll send the committee we'll send to CAD a copy of what we post on Monday. And I do also want to highlight that those regional listening sessions, we put them on 5 Mondays in a row so that if members are interested, you can come.
Great.
So we'll let
We
you know
appreciate
about those as well.
it very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you
And
so
then I
much.
know there's a couple of TAC members in the room. Are others joining by Zoom?
Okay, I think we have one person on Zoom,
And the rest will come in
and
person.
Jamie, Alex, and Nick were here in person.
Do y'all have a preferred order or what's your pleasure? Is anyone time constrained?
Lisa Jamie's here. Jamie.
Okay.
Jamie's on his way in. Okay, great.
Please join us, Jamie.
Thanks. I was listening out there and I guess I was on a delay. Good morning. Good to see you all. I'm Jamie Fidel with Audubon Vermont, which is perhaps a new development since last time I've been here in the chair. So previously worked for Vermont Natural Resources Council for 23 years and now am the new director at Audubon Vermont. And so great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Quickly testify as a member of the Technical Advisory Committee. I just would like to underscore a couple points for your consideration. I'm really excited by this opportunity. I was excited from the beginning stages of when you were working on the bill, through helping to support passage of the bill, and now helping to support implementation. It's because this provides an incredible opportunity for us to look at working with landowners, willing landowners who are interested in conserving their land. And we know we don't have all the tools that are available to help those willing landowners who want to make this choice, as sort of, you know, this is the decision that they're making for their land, and we know that the benefits are incredible, both for landowners and for our communities when land is conserved in Vermont. And so, you know, regardless of the goals that landowners have for their land, I think as Representative Sakowicz said the other day, you know, can we afford options for them to keep their land intact as a first starting point? And then can we support the suite of management decisions that landowners may make for their land, supporting working land, supporting wildlife habitat, maintaining water quality, providing recreational access, managing for climate resilience, managing for wildlands or natural areas. These are all important values that landowners have in Vermont. So we should try and build up all the opportunities possible. As was mentioned earlier, intergenerational transfer, there was a report to the legislature about 10 years ago on this dynamic in Vermont. And at the time, back in 2017, this was a statistic that 15% of forest land owners were over 75 years old. So I don't actually know what that stat is right now, but we are going to see sort of this large sort of intergenerational transfer. And then do we have the right tools, landowners? And I know we don't have enough options, because even just in my new job at Audubon, I fielded at least 2 calls over the last couple of months from landowners who were wondering what they can do to conserve their land. And they had reached out to land trust in their region. They have about 100 acres, and those parcels are too small, really, for the land trust to be able to help them. And some of them are really scared. They don't actually want to risk what's going to happen. Some of these parcels are they're working lands, and they want to keep them intact. And so what options do they have? And so this really provides an opportunity to look at the suite of tools to advance conservation opportunities. So funding, we know funding is constrained right now. So what can we do on the proactive side? Can we look at the Green Bank model? Can we look at leveraging, you know, we already do a good job of this, but what more can we do to leverage private philanthropy options? Other states have actually pooled, large coalitions have supported a portion of the sales tax or a portion of outdoor outdoor recreation equipment going towards conservation. There's all kinds of models to look at, understanding that it's a high hurdle to try and provide any more taxation in this moment. But what can we look at creatively to address the funding gaps? The policies that we need from easements, but can we look at providing landowners with potentially a tax credit for doing some level of conservation? Can we look at conservation agreement models? So there's a lot of different solutions that I think are important to look at through this process. Wearing my Audubon hat, really concerned about the amount of threatened and endangered species that we have listed in the state. Can we offer a certain incentive as we think about maintaining biodiversity and ecologically intact landscape for landowners who cooperatively enter into some kind of recovery, you know, strategy for those species and move them off the list through some kind of conservation mechanism? And I'd like to talk about sort of the durability of land conservation. There's no doubt that through easements and the current use program that we have done, we're doing important work in Vermont to keep our landscape intact for those landowners who choose to do that. You know, there's the conservation goals, and then there's the broad vision in Act 59. And I think it's important to look at programs like current use, and can there be an option for landowners to actually enroll a durable option to enroll? Could we somehow use the lien that's put on the property as a way for them to say, yes, I'm voluntarily electing that I would actually like to enroll my property in this program for a long period of time, whether that's permanent or some durable period of time? Can we look at the program serving as another option where easements may not work for landowners and may not be available? And that does lead me to kind of one of my last points, and that's on the equity side. We know that there are landowners who, one, just don't have the means in order to access even land ownership and even have options to conserve. And then there are landowners who are lucky enough to own land. They want to conserve it and they don't have all the options. So what models can we look at to serve the suite of people who appreciate conserved land? Can we look at cooperative land ownership models? Can we look at different ways to promote access, as has already been discussed in communities across Vermont? So, working with towns on strategies to build up the different options, whether that be town forest or other celebratory ways that we've looked at providing community access to conserve lands, and then the stewardship capacity, which is really important for us to look at, and building up the workforce and the people that are needed for this work. And so I could go on and on about the ideas that I think are in the mix, the ideas that are running through my head. I just want to sort of end by saying that I think this is a critically important opportunity. I think the TAC has been having some really productive conversations. There's a good diversity of perspectives there. And I'm really hoping that the plan can come out and give you a menu of options to act on, and to have some kind of a comprehensive approach that allows us to look at all the suite of conservation opportunities, all the management goals, and build up a sort of Big Tent level support to kind of move forward with the best strategies that we think make sense for Vermont. So with that, I will want to be efficient with my time, or you want to hear from others?
Great. Thanks for joining us today and for your testimony and your work following through on Act 59. Do members have questions? Representative Austin.
So again, another demographic, when I was talking about demographics of Vermont, is our workforce is aging out. In Vermont, they're growing older and retiring, and we need to attract, it's not that we need to attract taxpayers, we need to attract workforce to Vermont. I'm wondering what workforce, if you're kind of promoting that outside of Vermont, like what you're looking for in terms of this workforce you're talking about.
Yeah, I can give you a couple of examples. We're part of a project called Serve, Learn, Earn. It's in coalition with 3 other organizations in Vermont, and these are youth leadership opportunities for them to learn skills in order to then move into the workforce. And this is Resources, one of the groups. So we're looking at building housing opportunities. Audubon is one of the groups, along with BYCC, that looks at more of the conservation opportunities. But I think you'll see in the report suggestions that we do need to look at opportunities to build up sort of the conservation practitioners, whether that's the appraisers, the components of the conservation work that are needed in order to execute the deals, and where we don't have enough resources or people that are doing that work right now. And so I think there'll be a very strategic look at building up the workforce, and then what are the opportunities to do it, whether it's through college programs in Vermont, whether it's through these sort of trade and service learning opportunities that different organizations provide. Is it building up new curriculum? Is it creating some kind of incentive for people to enter into this part of the workforce? Where can they be housed? So really important question.
We have 3 other witnesses coming up here, and we want to wrap up around noon. So thanks, Jamie.
Okay, thank you.
Next.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for having me. I'm Nick Bennett. I'm the chair of the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council. I'm also the executive director of the Vermont Mountain Bike Association. I'm on the technical advisory committee for the VCP, as was mentioned earlier. I put together a few slides just to kind of touch on how outdoor recreation is both coming to this process as well as to the technical advisory committee. I'll try to run through those relatively quickly because I know we're tight on time. Just to briefly set sort of some context on outdoor recreation generally, Vermont hosts over 11,000 miles of public access trails. Many of those are stewarded, the majority of those are stewarded through collaborations between public lands managers and nonprofit stewardship organizations. Over 70% of public access trails in Vermont are located on private land. We have a highly vibrant and highly diversified outdoor business sector. The Vermont Outdoor Business Alliance organizes that group. There are dozens of outdoor recreation communities that have really oriented around recreation across the state. Public access recreation is a designated purpose for conservation in Vermont statute. That's really accelerated a lot of opportunities, some of which Trey touched on and others. Currently, outdoor recreation accounts for nearly 5% of Vermont's GDP as well. So that's second only in the nation, only behind Hawaii in terms of the degree to which outdoor recreation is responsible for economic benefit. And as I mentioned before, private landowners really carry a huge burden when it comes to hosting public access recreation in Vermont, at least from a trails perspective. And I should have mentioned as well, outdoor recreation, we come to this process. We both, and Trey touched on this, there's sort of the structured outdoor recreation, trail-based recreation, which I represent through the Trails and Greenways Council. And then there's the dispersed recreation, which Alex will talk about a little bit. We really are both sort of two sides, but a collaborative sort of force when we think about outdoor recreation. So who's the Trails and Greenways Council? This is the who I represent on the TAC. The 501c3, we were founded 35 years ago. We're an official advisor to the Agency of Natural Resources, designated in statute to advise on recreation. And we're really a member-focused organization, a volunteer board of many of which are folks like me who work for trail stewardship organizations, and we have a part-time staff member. So not a huge organization. But collectively, and that's who we bring to the table, we represent over 50,000 individual members, folks that have licenses or paid into our member organizations. We log over 100,000 hours of volunteer time to steward trails. We maintain and manage over 8,000 miles of trails across the state, support over 15,000, 16,000 here jobs through those outdoor recreation businesses. The assets we steward really are vital to that. And as I mentioned before, we really are the organization to steward trails on private land, which again is the lion's share of public access trails. Then we also work closely with, whether it's the federal, at the federal level for the Green Mountain National Forest, or the state agencies to help steward trails on public land as well. So really view ourselves as the collective stewardship organization for maintaining trails and trails of all type. These are winter trails, summer trails, motorized, non-motorized. We try to bring everybody to the table. So recreation and conservation, we really view recreation as a primary way in which the public accesses protected lands, and in many cases, a driver for their conservation can really support and fuel these efforts. As I mentioned before, public access recreation is a recognized purpose for conservation in statute, and there's a long and really vibrant history of how recreation has helped drive conservation in Vermont. We have the Land and Water Conservation Fund that's provided over 45 million in grant funding since 1965 to support projects across the state. We have the Long Trail Protection Campaign as an example. 25,000 acres have been conserved since the 1980s. And then new opportunities like the Velomont Trail, which seeks to conserve up to 200 or over 200,000 acres of parcels throughout the state as it builds a connection for similar to Long Trail, but for a sort of bike optimized and adapted accessible trail that will connect communities throughout Vermont. And then as noted before, outdoor recreation is one of the key stakeholders in Act 59. And one thing I noticed, while outdoor recreation, we were fortunate to become on the heels of the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, referred to as the SCORP. That's also part of Move Forward Together Vermont, which you might have heard about. This is led by the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative and ANR. But to create this plan, we have collectively as a community a plan for outdoor recreation in Vermont. And the vision for that plan is to foster healthy and vibrant communities through outdoor recreation, which nicely weaves directly into the community resilience portion of this act. So really nicely marriage between what Move Forward Together Vermont's seeking to achieve and what the Act 59 wants to achieve as well. We had their cross-cutting objectives in the plan, one of which is equity, which has been touched on a couple times in this campaign, really looking at all the actions that the community is pursuing, taking that equity lens, and then climate resilience too, knowing that we're living in a changing climate. We need to think how we make our infrastructure more durable. There's a whole bunch of actions, 19 of them organized across these categories of stewardship, wellness, and economic development. And I just tagged two here that some of those actions underneath wellness involve developing recreational opportunities and conserving open spaces that strategically fill gaps in experience and distribution across the state. So that's a targeted outcome of that plan. And then also to create and enhance in-community outdoor recreation opportunities that directly connect where people live, learn, and work. So there are actions baked into this plan that really connect directly into what we see is an outcome of the CRPPA. And then kind of as we're coming to the plan itself, the role we view, and as we're bringing, sort of participating in the TAC, there are three ways that we think trail-based recreation really belongs as part of these 30 by 30 and 50 by 50 efforts. One is to provide equitable access to conserved spaces. And I think it's important to distinguish at times access doesn't necessarily equal equity. There's an important role to play for the infrastructure we touched on to make way for not only to make spaces inviting for people who haven't always felt historically welcome in the outdoors, but for folks with physical disabilities, as Representative Austin touched on, for folks as they're aging out, to provide infrastructure that allows them to access these lands. So that's one big bucket we think we can help achieve. Certainly to promote community resilience. We know that outdoor recreation generates health outcomes, well-being for the communities, and economic vitality. I mentioned that nearly 5% of GDP number. And then also really importantly, as a driver to help conserve new spaces. We see, and it's been touched on, the resource constraints for this plan. We know that our community can come together and get excited about projects and bring money to the table, bring enthusiasm from the community. So really helping drive that uptick we need to achieve in conservation outcomes. And then in terms of how it's currently incorporated in the draft, and you'll see the full public draft, it sounds like in a day or two, or just a couple of days, promoting outdoor recreation is baked in as a pathway underneath that second objective for conservation in communities. And it's also really vital to some of the other pathways in the plan, including increasing equitable access, as we talked about. And then, as I mentioned before, that need to increase and optimize funding and financing, really coming to the table with that support. And just to wrap up here, there's a couple other ways that we're working to engage our community. We have Outdoor Recreation Day here at the State House next Thursday. We'll have at least, I think, over 100 folks here to advocate for outdoor recreation, talking about impact stories in their communities. There'll be an opportunity to have a lunch with constituents down at the pavilion. And then we're also hosting, as was touched on, it's great that we're going to be hosting one of these stakeholder listening sessions for outdoor recreation groups on March 9th that will really seek to sort of absorb and take in a lot of feedback and help channel that through the TAC into the plan itself. And sorry for the lightning round, it was pretty fast, but hopefully that these at least will leave behind as well, folks.
Yeah, great. Thank you for your testimony. I think in the interest of time, we're going to skip to the next. And then at the end, if we have time for questions, I just want to make sure the last two folks have time to share what they came to share. So thank you for your testimony. We will welcome Hannah Sessions via Zoom. Oh, Big's hand is next.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just going on the order of the agenda here. So we'll go to Hannah. Great.
Hi, everybody. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very happy to testify as a member of the TAC team. I really appreciate the representation on the TAC team. At every meeting, I'm learning a new perspective. It's a really great gathering of people. It's been extremely thoughtful and intentionally put together. So I'm on the committee representing farmers and landowners. For those of you who don't know, I know Amy knows about me, but a little about me for those of you who don't know. My husband and I farm on a conserved farm in Leicester, lovely Leicester in southern Champlain Valley, southern Addison County. We purchased our farm in 2000 with the intention of selling our development rights to fund a cheese business, which we did in 2002. And fast forward 25 years almost, and we have a herd of 125 goats, and we make 60,000 pounds of cheese annually. We distribute across the Northeast and across the nation. On our website, we employ 10 people. And we also support a small family cow dairy farm in Leicester. As of now, we are the only 2 dairy farms left in Leicester. We're also an animal welfare approved farm. And so I've been lucky enough to speak around the Northeast about profitable and humane farming practices. As a first generation farm, this has been only possible because of farm conservation. So having gone through the conservation process, I was really happy to serve on the board of VHCB until 2019, and now I'm on the board of the Vermont Land Trust. So later on in the early, maybe around 2010, I can't remember the year exactly, we did an overlay easement and we conserved 50 acres of wetlands on our farm. And together with our neighbors, I think we're the largest contiguous wetland in the Northeast. And we saved the town of Middlebury from flooding not once, but twice during Irene and then in the summer of 2023. And Representative Ballant came to visit our farm in 2023 to sort of like see the wetlands in action. So we really appreciate the flexibility that was allowed to us to do an additional layer of conservation on that land. And it was made easier because our land was sort of already in the system of conservation. So once we conserve land, we have better and more easy access to additional layers of conservation on those lands. Then we were able to purchase proper hay land with that money across the street when our neighbor was threatening to put in an RV park, which was not a very popular idea in our neighborhood, understandably. So maybe some of you know, but alongside our Act 59 30 by 30 is another 30 by 30 goal, which is prompted by the New England Food Systems Planners Partnerships. And that is to raise 30% of the food consumed in New England. So it's really amazing that those two goals are traveling parallel to each other on this path. And so we have a great opportunity to play a huge role in that 30 by 30 goal by promoting farming and, in fact, growing more farms in Vermont rather than less. I have been loving being on the VLT board and watching the mapping that is going on across the state. And I know that VLT considers a lot of different, biodiversity and flood resiliency impact when they consider any project. So that's all I have to say today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for joining us and for your work on the TAC and on the boards.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'll keep this quick. My name's Alex Smith. I'm here representing Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, which is a nonprofit, nationwide nonprofit whose primary goal, we got our hands on a lot of different things these days, but generally speaking, we're there to advocate for the acquisition and stewardship of public land and maintain hunting and fishing access to it. That's our big deal. I came here, I'm from the Adirondacks originally, which has been made it for very interesting context to be on the technical advisory committee, because the Adirondacks in a lot of ways are somewhere where the goals envisioned in Act 59 have borne out. It's like there's some significant differences, but by and large, about 50% of the Adirondacks, which is about the same acreage as Vermont, roughly, are permanently conserved and protected and publicly held. Differences there, the other 50% also is subject to some pretty stringent zoning recommendations that are not permanent conservation, but provide some of the same benefits. And I think one of the really interesting things for me moving to Vermont, to Bristol and Addison County when I came over here was I looked at the landscape around me and I thought, this will work. This is good mountains. I can live here, which I was very nervous about leaving the Adirondacks. And I came very quickly to realize that though I had a lot of access and then there was a terrific landscape there close to my door, it was really fragile. It was entirely dependent, is largely dependent. We do have some national forest in the area, more than a lot of the state does, but it was largely dependent on private landowner charitability, largely, and the lack of development in places that, as somebody whose day job is in the building industry, I felt were very vulnerable locations as well. So it's been really exciting to be a part of this committee and work towards protecting some of that for my own children, which is sort of my fundamental goal in all of this. I think one thing that I bring to the TAC and that these guys have heard me talk about probably so ad nauseum is that there are certain mistakes that I think happen in the creation of the guidelines around protection of the Adirondacks. And I think we have an opportunity to avoid this time around. Primarily that the process did not feel terribly close to the people of the Adirondacks. And I think where I grew up, you were sort of born with a certain mistrust of Big C conservation because you're surrounded by the restrictions that is placed upon the local economy. And that is, in my mind, as somebody who acknowledges and left the Adirondacks somewhat due to those things, I still am glad they exist. But I think one thing that we have an opportunity to do this time around, so to speak, is to learn from that to a degree and to bring this process as close to the people as possible and see them, make sure that people see themselves in it. I don't feel that these two goals are mutually exclusive. And I guess the sort of last thing that I will say is that looking at the Adirondacks and looking at Vermont, I feel that one truth of it all is that the only relevant conservation is permanent conservation. When we're talking about protecting biodiversity on a grand scale, what happens in 100 years is what's relevant. What happens in 200 years is what's relevant. And as I see it, the only feasible way to achieve that sort of protection is through the development of a real ethic among the people of Vermont, or the perpetuation of an ethic, as I do think it's there in a lot of folks. People need to want this, and it needs to be something that survives political winds and all of the other factors that we cannot see coming over the rest of time. And that's an awfully ambitious goal, as is everything we're doing here. But I think in my mind, and where Backcountry Hunters and Anglers comes into this, so I think the way you get to that is partly through people being able to access and create a life around the outdoors. I'm here because I love to be out there, and I'm a licensed guide, and I'm in the woods 100 days a year. And that's why I want so badly for it to be there for my kids to do the same thing. And I think that as we go forward through these processes, keeping that in mind, that people's investment in the outdoors generates this ethic that will protect it when nothing else really will in the long term. People got to want this to be here. They got to care. They got to see themselves in it, and they got to live it. And I think that opportunity is there in Vermont. We have this unbelievable landscape. We have this unbelievable resource for people, whether they want to feed themselves off of it or ski in it or just wander around. It's a tremendously accessible type of wilderness compared to a lot of the other wild areas in this country. It's fairly low barrier to entry, the kind of woods that we have around here. And this is a state where people have it in them already. So advancing that in every way that we can through generating opportunities for access, generating opportunities for people to go out there and feel this connection to the land. I think in my mind, that's where the long-term effects, the long-term goals of Act 59 will be achieved in the really relevant timescape. I've realized I hear myself say this. I think this, in some ways, a very legitimate criticism would be that it's a very human-centric way to look at all this, and biodiversity is not about humans. And I guess the way I look at it is that generating advocates for the non-human is the ultimate goal of a project like this, and investment in the outdoors and access to the outdoors is the way we get there. I could carry on all day. I think you guys got to go though, right?
Thank you for sharing your perspective. That was very well put. We have a couple minutes, and all of the members of the TAC are still with us. And so if folks have questions for any of them, now's your chance. Representative Chapin.
So just love to hear a few more words, and this is sort of aimed at a number of people in the room, about the vulnerability and forest fragmentation. And don't feel like we've been talking about it enough over the past while, and it affects so many different things that everybody cares about. And I guess if anybody wants to just share something, and I guess I'd also, the other vulnerability I'm hearing is about capacity and having the right organizations and people and money in the right places to help shepherd projects. So I guess I just want to name those two vulnerabilities and see if anybody wants to speak a little bit more, particularly to forest fragmentation.
That was actually the one thing I cut out of my little spiel there for time. But one of the things that I've been very appreciative of when it comes to the group's approach has been this focus on habitat connectivity, because in the years that I've been in Vermont, for instance, is just one very easy to see example. I've watched the range of moose change in the woods around Bristol. If fundamentally in 10 years. And, I think there's a perception of, people don't always understand when there's looking at certain types of wildlife that don't really need large scale connected habitats, the effect that losing that connectivity has on certain species that are really important to us in Vermont. And the fact that the state is focused so much on identifying these critical corridors and preventing that fragmentation within them, I think is very much the right way to go. And I'm very appreciative of that focus.
I guess I would just add that I think that there's been a lot of agreement that forest fragmentation is an issue that we need to grapple with. And that's come from decades of conversations in the state, whether that's the Forest Roundtable that BNRC and I helped convene, to the Wildlife Action Plan, the Forest Action Plan. They all of our major documents name it as an issue that impacts our ecological health and our economic health. It's just as much an economic issue as we fragment and parcelize, working forests. It gets to a point where they're not viable as a working forest, and then we're also impacting the ecological sort of functionality of our landscape, and that's why we have Vermont Conservation Design, and it's a blueprint on how to keep our landscape intact. And certainly, it's a hard thing to track, and we've been working on it. There's different metrics that we can use, but I think the agreement is that it continues to happen, and so. I don't know if there's like particular statistics you'd like to know about, or I think it is inherent in what's motivating a lot of us in participating in this process to try and figure out proactive incentive-based approaches to work with landowners to address it.
I give one more, Kate Logan has a question.
I just wanted to make.
A lunch meet I have to get to. Excuse me.
I just wanted to make a comment that it would be helpful if we could take more testimony on forest fragmentation. I feel like a update for committee on that would be helpful, especially given that there's been a call from the governor to repeal the road rule. And the road rule was one of the pieces of Act 250 reform that we specifically hoped would help address forest fragmentation. And so I'm concerned that we're heading down a policy dialogue pathway that doesn't take like forest fragmentation into consideration adequately.
All right, thank you.
It's not a question. I just want to say.
Okay.
Okay, I think Nick, the last time I just saw you was like up in the Northeast Kingdom you were on a bike.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just wanted to say, I was visiting, like you had legislator where you could go look at forests, you could look at the outdoor. I just want to say how helpful that was for me to really have an understanding of what the work is that we're doing here. And I would just hope that you continue to do that because it was very helpful.
One quick comment, thank you. And I think part of this process, and it's delightful to be a part of it, is really focusing on collaborations and understanding how we're all coming to the woods and to the lands with a lot of similar objectives and how it's been nice in terms of trying to protect this amazing place and thinking how, and those field visits, I think, do really nicely see how we can all work together. In many cases, in there are spots where we absolutely shouldn't bring people, or we should avoid putting trails and things like that because they're acutely sensitive. And so the more we can work together, the more we can do it, and it feels better.
Thank you all again. This was great. Nice diversity from the TAC and great presentations. And
And I know that there were other TAC members, if you have more time and more interest, there are other voices and perspectives that have contributed the amazing diversity of this group, which has been the strength of it.
Yeah,
So
great.
if you make more time, we'll come back.
All right. We'll do our best to do that. Thank you all again.